Hello everyone and welcome to this new R in Azure 5.6 series. In this tutorial, we will be creating an interaction system that we can use in our game to interact with literally anything we want. So by the end of the series, you will have a fully interactable items and an easily expandable system. So if I get closer to television, it says turn on, and if we press E, the television will turn on. Then if you press E again, it will turn off. Okay. Now this system also includes different hardware device functionalities. So if we connect my Xbox controller, as you can see, it says input device has been connected. You can see the screen, the widget now changes the button image to the Xbox button. And if while my Xbox controller is connected, I use the keyboard, it will change to the E button. Now if I use the controller again, it will change to X button. As you can see, I'm switching between the two. Okay, so let's get started. We need to create our project. So let's create it using the third person template. Choose C++ and quality preset. I'm gonna choose scalable. You could choose maximum, but for me, this is a tutorial and I will choose scalable only. Let's call it interaction tutorial. Let's create the project. Now that our project is created, let's go ahead and collapse everything here, and let's go to our editor. And first thing we need to do is to create an interface that is responsible for our interaction. Let's go to new C++ class and scroll down to Unreal Interface, and let's call it interaction interface, or let's call it interactables interface. And let's give it a folder so we can keep everything organized. So here, after interaction tutorial, let's create the folder called interfaces, and let's create the class. Okay, so for the interface, we don't need the CPP folder file, so we can just close it. In here, we need to create a couple of functions. The first function will be a virtual void on interaction range entered, and it takes a parameter, and the parameter will be our character, so the interaction tutorial character. So first we need to forward declare it. Let's do it here. So class interaction tutorial character, and this will be different for each one of you, this class name. So just write your class name in here, and here we want to add a interaction tutorial character. Let's call it character. The second one is similar, but on interaction range exited. Okay. Now the third function is virtual void on interacted. Okay, and we need one more for virtual void handle interaction. Actually, we don't need this parameter here. We just need it in here. And we need a virtual Boolean function can be interacted constant with 0. Okay, now we created our interface functions. Now we need to implement them in our classes that will be interactable. We don't have that right now, so let's go and create one. So tools, new C++ class, and let's choose type actor, and let's call it InteractablesBase. This will be responsible. This will be the parent class of our interactables, and we want to store it maybe somewhere, and let's call it interactables folder. Okay, now let's reload all and go to our InteractablesBase header. And in here, we want to implement the interface we just created. So let's first include the header for it. So let's include interfaces, the folder name, and it's called interactables interface. So interactables interface.h. Then here we actually implemented, so public InteractablesInterface. interface. Now we can use this function we created in here. You can just copy all here and place them here, but we need to write override in here. Override. Now for the can be interacted, by default I will return true by default. Okay, great. Now we need to create a sphere component for overlap collisions. Whenever the player overlap with the sphere, we call OnInteractionRangeEntered, and whenever we stop overlapping, we call the OnInteractionRangeExited. Okay, so let's go to our header. Inside the private, let's give it a U property of visible anywhere, and the category of components, and U sphere component. Let's call it interaction range, and let's forward declare the sphere component. Okay, now inside our constructor in here, first let's stick this to false to improve performance because we don't really need it. And in here we need to create this interaction range. So interaction range is equal to create default subobject, use sphere component, let's call it interaction range. Okay, now let's give it some default values, first let's include the header for it, sphere components, like sphere and its sphere radius, like 200 maybe, and that's it. We don't really need anything. We also need to create a static mesh. So let's go ahead inside the protected. Actually, let's move this here to protected. Okay. Now for the static mesh, let's just copy this and use static mesh component. Let's call it interactable mesh. Okay, and here interactable mesh. And let's set up, or let's make it the root component. So root component equal to interactable mesh, and then here interaction range set up attachment. Let's attach it to the mesh. Okay, now we need to fill these on interaction range entered and interaction range exited. But first, we need a way to figure out when the player collide and whenever he stop colliding with the sphere component. So let's go in here and create two functions inside the private. And these functions will be responsible for the on actor begin overlap and on the actor end overlap. So u function void on begin overlap and takes two parameters, overlapped actor and the other actor. Okay, and we need one for the end overlap. Okay, now we need, whenever we begin overlap, we need to call the interaction range entered, and whenever we stop, we need to call the interaction range exited. So let's go ahead and do that and copy this here. However, I just noticed that we don't really need these parameters for these two functions. So let's go ahead and delete them, and also delete them from the header declaration, and let's delete them from the interactable interface. Let's just keep this one for the handle interaction. Okay. Now we need to bind this begin overlap function to the built-in function of the class of begin overlap. So I will give you an example. Let's say this is our blueprint class. We need to bind this function. We need to bind it to this function. Okay. So in the begin play of our InteractablesBase, let's go and type OnActor begin overlap dot add dynamic this at AInteractablesBase, and the function we want to bind to is the OnBeginOverlap. And we do the same thing for the end overlap, but let's change this to end. Now whenever we overlap with this actor, we will call this, and whenever we stop overlapping, we will call this function. Now, what happens when we when we start colliding? Well, when we enter the range, we need to show the player a widget that tells him that this is an interactable item and that he can interact with it. And when we exit, we need to hide this widget. So let's go into our InteractablesBase header and let's create inside the protected a widget component. First, let's forward declare the widget component. Yes. Okay. And let's now create it in here. So widget component. Let's call it interaction widget component. Let's copy this and let's go to our constructor. So widget component is equal to create default subobject. And let's call it interaction widget. Now let's give it a collision. Let's first need to include the header. Let's give it collision enabled. No collision. Let's attach it to the mesh, interactable mesh. What else? Let's set interaction widget component. Let's add row size or set desired size true. And let's by default let's hide it. So set hidden in game true. Now we don't have our widget yet, so let's go ahead and create the blue C++ class for it. Let's call it interaction widget. And let's set the folder inside the widgets. Okay, now our widget is created. We need an image and we need a text block. So class image and class text block. Inside the private property. Interaction text and property interaction or let's button image. Okay. Now let's compile everything here. Now let's go into our engine, into our editor, and let's create a new folder here. Call it blueprints. And let's create a user interface, user widget blueprint. And let's call it bp underscore interaction widget. And inside the class settings, let's change the parent class to the interaction widget we just created in the C++. We will get this error, and that's because we don't have first let's add the size box. We don't have the text block and the image we created in here. Because of bind widget, we get these errors because we don't have them in the editor yet. The editor expects these widgets to be binded, but we didn't bind them yet. We will do it in a second. First, we need a size box, and we want to give it a minimum desired height of 50. And let's change this to desired on screen. Then inside we need a border. Okay, and inside this border we need an image, and let's call this image button image. Now this error is gone. We only have the text left, but let's wrap it with a horizontal box, and let's add the text in here, and let's call it interaction text. Okay, now for the image and the interaction text, we want to set the horizontal and vertical alignment to center. Okay, and we want the border, I want it to be black, and on the alpha I want it like 0.5 maybe, and give it some nice rounded corners. So draw as rounded box, and the rounding type is fixed radius, and let's add the corner radius, maybe I don't know, 10, 10, 10, 10 on all corners. Let's give a padding here on the left, maybe 2, on the right 5. Yeah, let's give it 2. Okay. Now for the text, we want, let's say, interact. And for the image, right now we don't have an image. So let's add anything. Let's add this one. Let's change the size 2020, maybe 5050. Okay. Later on, we will replace this image with an image of our button. Let's say for E, we want to place an image E, or maybe if you have an Xbox controller connected or PS5 connected, we will show the X button or the square button or whatever. Okay. Now that our blueprint is created, we need to connect it to our interaction widget component. So let's go ahead and do that. So static constructor helpers f class finder, and the class we want to find is the user widget. Okay, and let's call it widget or interaction widget class finder. And now we need to paste the actual path of our the actual path of our widget, of our blueprint widget. So here, let's go and right click on it and copy reference, and let's paste it here, and let's remove everything before game like this, and let's delete everything after the name of the class. So the duplicate name, let's remove it. That's it. Okay. Now, if interaction widget class finder dot succeeded, okay, we want to set the interaction widget component set widget class to be equal to the widget class what do you call interaction widget dot class. Now our widget component holds this widget as its widget class. Okay, and now in here, when we enter the range, we want to check if interaction, if it's valid. We want to set hidden in game to false. And when we exit, we need to hide it again. Okay, great. Now, on interacted, we want to check if can be interacted, if we can interact with the item. Remember how we created this function. Now it's time to use it. So if we can interact with it, handle interaction. We call the handle interaction, and the parameter, the character parameter, we need to actually set it in here in the interface. Here. Okay. And now we can call it. So if it can be interacted, we handle the interaction. And in here, let's command this override and child classes. Now in here, it's empty. We only override in subclasses, like for example, a door. We override this function to make it open and close whenever we interact with it. Or let's say a TV, we turn it on and off whenever we interact with it. Okay. Now let's create a blueprint. Let's create a blueprint based on the interactable base. So let's call it BP underscore InteractablesBase. Okay. And you can see the sphere we created and the widget. And if you go down to user interface, we can see that the widget class is not set for some reason. Maybe we need to compile first. Okay, now that we have compiled, the interaction widget is available in our widget component. Okay, and there it is. Okay, let's keep it hidden for now. And let's create a child class from this blueprint. Let's call it BP underscore, or let's delete this. And let's go back to our InteractablesBase. And in handle interaction, let's add a debug message just for demonstration. -1, 2.0, and the color green or red. And the message is we or I am an interactable. I am interactable. That's it. Okay, let's compile. Great. Now let's set the interactable here somewhere, and let's go into details. And for the static mesh, let's choose anything. This target base. Okay. Now, if we get close to it, as you can see, the interact component is here, but it's not working as intended. So let's go and see what's that about. So in here, we need to set the interaction widget component, set widget space to screen instead of word. Okay. Now, if we go and interact with it, as you can see, it's working, but it's at the bottom, and we don't really need that. We need it somewhere in the middle. So let's go into our interactable base, or we could just, for now, we could just make it from here. So click on the interaction widget component from the details panel and just take it to the top. Okay, and maybe make the image a little bigger. Okay, maybe the font too. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, now if we press, nothing happens. Whatever we press, nothing happens because we don't have this binding yet, this input binding. So we will do it in the next tutorial. That's it for this tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, and share. And I will see you in the next one.